voting issues, and we would ask you if you agree with the negative team on either of these 3 voting issues that you would vote negative at the end of this debate round. But I'd like to start off by just addressing one thing before I start, and that is new arguments. Now, the affirmative team cannot bring up any new arguments or new evidence in their next speech, and the reason for that is because if they do, we don't have any chance to respond to them. And so all of the arguments that were not addressed in the last speech have been dropped by the affirmative team and should flow to the negative team at the end of this debate round. Now, let's look at the 3 voting issues. The first voting issue is that of topicality, and this is the biggest voting issue because it's an a priori issue. That means that it's the first issue that should be considered in any round, is whether we are actually debating the topic that we have been given under the resolution. And I have a couple arguments I'd like to make under this. Now, first I want to look at whether they're actually topical, and then second look at the impact of this. So first, is that second mandate actually topical? They responded by saying that it's affecting the state system, but the actual reform is on the federal system. My response is that a reform is correcting abuses in something. The actual system is the courts, the prisoners. The actual system is in the states. So the system that they are reforming is the states. Yes, they're giving funding from the federal system, but that's not the criminal justice system. They're giving funding from the federal government, applying it to the state system. And so the actual reform that's happening is on the state level. Now, the impact to this, the reason that this matters in this debate round, is that if you take out their first mandate, their second mandate cannot stand alone because it's not significant. Their second mandate would only deal with federal drug offenders. They have not shown you that it's significant. They gave you evidence talking about how there's 10,000 people eligible, but this cross applies to the solvency that just because 10,000 people are eligible does not mean 10,000 people are actually going to be admitted into the program. This is not significant. They have not showed you that that second mandate is topical. Now, the second voting issue in this round is vagueness. They have not given you specifically what their plan is going to do. When we look at their mandates, both of their mandates are being completely left up to Congress. The first one is capacity will be increased. How do we determine what capacity is increased? How much is it increased by? This is being completely left up to Congress. As my partner argued in his last speech, we can't just leave it up to Congress and say, increase the capacity of the drug courts. This is not going to work. They have to tell you how much is going to be increased, how many drug courts they're actually going to have, how many people they're going to hire, all of these things. Their second mandate, again, is not saying how much money they're going to be giving to states, how they're going to defer it. We're not asking them to list each of the 50 states and say, this state's going to get $2 million, this is going to get $2 billion. But what we're asking is that they give you some kind of methodology for how that's actually going to be determined. They've dropped this argument. The result is that when you pass this plan, you are passing it as Congress. You are saying, we are going to pass this, but we do not know what's going to happen after you pass this. We don't know how these funds are going to be diverted, how much the capacity is going to be increased. So that's the second voting issue, that of vagueness. And if you agree with us on this point alone, we would ask you to vote negative. Now, the third voting issue is that of net benefits, because that's what has been given throughout the round. I'm going to look first at the weighing mechanism of significant versus just regular net benefits. Now, they pointed out that they don't have to actually make a significant reform, that the reform has to be significant, but the effects can be insignificant. Now, if a reform is significant, then obviously its effects are going to be significant. Also, if a reform is not significant, its effects are not going to be significant. When we're making policy decisions, we have to look at opportunity costs. For everything that we do, we're going to have some kind of cost incurred. You have to give up something when you take something, and we have to look at that opportunity cost and see whether it's actually significantly worth it, not whether it just achieves one minimal benefit. So with that said, my first point under this is looking at all of the solvency arguments that we've brought up throughout the round. The first is, who do these apply to? They have dropped our arguments about how these apply to 500,000 to 1 million people are rejected per year with the drug court program, and that evidence was specifically talking about if it was applied nationwide, if it was applied to all drug offenders, 500,000 to 1 million would be rejected per year. They also did not really fully address our argument about how the prosecutor are only looking at non-violent offenses. They said, well, it's okay, it doesn't really matter whether they're looking at violent offenders or whether they're looking at the people that actually need to be solved, but this does matter. Now, the second argument here is that of the dropped disadvantages. They have not addressed any of our disadvantages in today's debate round, and those two disadvantages were, one, they're masking the problem that better solutions are not going to be able to be made. This is the significant argument, because when we're looking at opportunity costs, if we're stopping better alternatives to stop the same problem, we cannot pass a plan that's not going to be significant. And then they dropped the disadvantage about fairness and due process. So the net benefits are definitely on the negative side. The costs outweigh the benefits. Thank you.
Are the judges ready? And the timer? All right, I'll begin. Now, over the course of this speech, I'm going to try to blitz through all the arguments that have been brought up in today's debate round and show why I believe they should flow to the affirmative team and that we should enact a drug court solution. Now, the first thing I'd like to respond to are their disadvantages. The first was their due process disadvantage. They never actually brought up any evidence stating that the due process was violated, as we talked about in the cross-ex earlier on, so we did not need to respond to this particular disadvantage as no evidence was actually brought up on this point. The second is the masking disadvantage, that we are doing this as opposed to other solutions, which is simply not true. We are enacting our plan. We have nothing against other solutions also being enacted. We never said that in our plan. We simply stated that our plan would be enacted. We have nothing against other solutions being enacted as well. The next thing I'd like to address is the goal of net benefits. Now, we've argued a lot on whether the net benefits have to be significant or whether they don't actually have to be significant net benefits. In the resolution, it says that it must be a significant reform, but it doesn't say that it has to have significant benefit. So if it has any benefit, but it's a significant reform, then we believe our plan should be enacted. And because it applies to millions of people, we believe it's a significant reform, and if it has any benefit, it should be passed. However, once again, I do believe that our plan has significant benefits, so this is not a voting issue regardless. The next thing I'd like to address is their alleged voting issue of topicality. The first thing I'd like to address is our first mandate states that capacity will be increased to allow all federal eligible drug offenders to be diverted in a drug course. This has not been contested. This mandate will be passed regardless of whether the second mandate is topical or not. And because this would apply to tens of thousands of individuals in federal court, even if only the first mandate was topical, our plan still warrants an affirmative ballot. The second argument is why our second mandate is in fact topical. Now, if we're going to be this nitpicky about it, let's talk about whether reform is used as a noun or a verb in this particular case. Because reform is used as a verb in the resolution, it means that it's referring to who is doing the reforming, who is actually making the action. And the person making the action is the federal government. Our agency, if you look at our plan, is the U.S. Department of Justice and the federal court system. So who is actually doing the action is the federal government, therefore a federal policy. They also argue that it must be a significant change to policy, not just an expansion of our existing policy. However, this is a significant change to policy because of the fact that it changes the way we deal with millions of drug offenders. Therefore, it is a significant change in our policy. The next thing I'd like to address is their vagueness. This is a completely unrealistic standard. They have our study ahead of them on the methodology. They didn't have time to read it. I don't have time to read it either. The study, they already agreed by reading it earlier, is a well-done study, and the judges can look at the study later on to look at the methodology if they would like to. The second, they said that we did not address how we were going to allocate the cost, how we were going to allocate the money. The way we were going to allocate this is through Congress. Congress will look at each state and see it based on the percentage of the drug offenders that are in those states. They will allocate the money accordingly, as I stated in cross-ex. The next argument is that some people would still be ejected. In the current system, everyone is ejected. In our plan, 70% of the people go through drug courts, so this argument is not relevant. In the current system, none of these 1.2 million will be able to succeed and go through drug courts. In our plan, 70% do go through drug courts, so this is net beneficial. This is not a harm, this is a benefit. Now, the next thing is that they said it focuses on those who are easy to rehabilitate. Once again, we stated we solved this problem by sending all eligible offenders through drug courts. We solved this problem by sending all eligible offenders through drug courts. And second, they argued that our studies quoted those who were flawed. However, we did not quote the flawed studies, as we stated in our Government Accountability Office study. They looked at all the studies done so far, and we've only quoted the ones that did not send only the easy to rehabilitate through their studies. The next thing I'd like to address is the cost. They, as I stated earlier, the Government Accountability Office, at the beginning of this year, summarized every study ever done, and they averaged it out to an average of $10,000 savings per participant. So as you can see, because they've looked at every single study ever done, this is clearly an average of $10,000 per participant. The next thing I'd like to address is the evidence standard. Because the Government Accountability Office summarizes every study ever done, we have essentially quoted every single study ever done on drug courts. The negative team, on the other hand, has quoted one study, which was the preliminary result of the MADCE study, which we quoted later on the final results of the MADCE study. So as you can see, evidence standard clearly flows to the affirmative team. They've quoted a few people with opinions, but no reliable studies, only the old results of one study, whereas we have quoted every single study. And as we said in our 1AC, there's been more research done on drug courts than any other aspect of the criminal justice system. Finally, what the negative team has ignored are the benefits to the 70% of people that do succeed and go through drug courts. These hundreds of thousands of people's lives are changed, and they've completely ignored this, talking only about the possible potential drawbacks. And because our policy is net beneficial, I urge an affirmative ballot in today's debate.